One of the biggest headaches for me when doing game jams is that you have to do the job of 7 people all at once in the span of a few short days. From programming, modeling, texturing, UI design, illustrating, sound design, QA testing, and game design, it gets draining fast. So, how did I pull this off in under 2 days then? Well, I lied. I didn't really do the job of 7 people, I just did 3, which were programming, QA testing, and game design. So, how did that happen? Did I use AI for the assets? Did I pay someone to make my assets? Well, no, not really. That's because Kenney's Game Jam is an annual event where it's all about developing games with pre-made assets. With that said, you'd probably say something along the lines of,
"What could go wrong now? If your development process is heavy, wouldn't the time allotted be enough to make something good?"
While that might be true for the other participants, that wasn't the case for me. Everything went wrong, from planning, execution, and publishing. Here's how.
I ain't your average sicko. I'm dead, just like disco. My bank account is 0, 0, 0, oh no.
The theme was scale, and I knew I had to make something like Legos. But what should the gameplay be like? Well, at first I wanted to make this sort of block building game where you face off with enemies to get their blocks and build yourself up. However, I wasn't really confident at the time about following through with it, so it got scrapped. Another idea I had was making it so that you play as a small block, wielding a sword, and you have to swing it against enemies, which in this case were humans. But again, I wasn't confident with following through with it, especially with the time constraint of only 2 days. Finally, I then had an idea. I had to remake Cuphead. Yes, that game where it took the developers around 6 years of having to painstakingly draw every frame of its world traditionally. That Cuphead. And I had to do it in just 2 days. Now, with the power of hindsight, was the project even feasible to make?
Nope.
I started this whole ordeal by making a simple character controller, and after that I then added NPCs, a simple dialogue system, and while trying to implement the arenas for the boss fights, I encountered a problem. But before I try to present that, I first have to explain something that Cuphead does. In Cuphead, there's 2 types of scenes that we have to take note of, the overworld and the boss stages. The overworld acts as the central hub where the player can actually interact with the surroundings and talk with NPCs, while the boss stages are where the actual fights take place. Initially, I thought that simply switching scenes would be enough, but I had a problem where if I spawned the player back into the overworld, they wouldn't be able to return back to the previous position. To solve this, we have to make it so that when the player leaves the overworld, their position would be stored and would be used later when the player returns. So my approach for this was to have a root scene that stores the overworld state and swaps the current one with the target scene. After this, I then added the player's character controller for the boss fights, so we have one for the overworld and one for the actual fights. It moves in only 2 dimensions, and while I thought that it would have been cool for the player's aiming system to work with the mouse input, I opted to use the standard 8-directional aiming system because it felt more natural. And then, I had to develop the boss fights. This is where everything went downhill really quick. The main reason is that boss fights take a good chunk of time in the oven for them to actually feel fun, engaging, and have this kind of grand feel to them. Cuphead took about 6 years before it released, and there's a good reason for it. Although the bosses are pretty simple to implement, making their animations and balancing changes weren't. I didn't have the time, so I had to cram them all out in a day. Because I woke up, the first thing I did was to make a system for the enemies to damage the player. I simply added a hitbox and it worked pretty great. But now, I had to make it so that the enemy will activate the hitbox at a specific point in their animation and make it linger for a while. The initial approach was to make the lingering effect be a fixed timer, but I found out soon enough that the animations I needed weren't always going to be the same. So the approach I took for this was to get your animation, make a separate track for it, assign the keyframe in which the enemy can damage the player, and then assign the keyframe where that damage window stops. After implementing that system, I then got to making the actual boss fights. At first, I thought I could rush out 5 unique bosses, but the further I got into making the fights, the more I realized how stupid that was and just capped it to only 3 fights. What I did to set the stages was to first make a mock-up scene inside of Godot using CSG meshes, export that scene into Blender, and then re-import that back into Godot with all the boss animations and decorations set. I encountered a small problem with the player's character controller in regards to the second stage. The player couldn't really stay still to shoot the boss. I fixed it by making a button that locks the player in place. Finally, I then got to making the actual page for the game, and at this point, I was stressing out because I had an hour left and I still needed to set it up. And I couldn't really be bothered to make a decent title card for it, which again, in hindsight was a poor decision because it would have given my project a pretty decent chance to stand out. And finally, after all of those, the game was finally published. After a week the game was released, here were the stats. While I did have low expectations for the game's performance, I didn't expect it would perform this bad. Now, I think one of the biggest problems I didn't take into consideration was the lack of a web build. From the get-go, I built the entire thing using C#, and because of some problems with .NET, I didn't have the option to export the project for a web build, even if I wanted to. Now, most of the feedback consists of something along the lines of,
"Your game sucks. It does too much and fails to deliver. 0/10.
because, the game is kind of dog. Though I had a much more enjoyable experience with developing the project before this, which, by the way, you should go check it out at vonrafael.itch.io, I think the reason for that was because of 3 things. Bonepiercer from the get-go had a very solid concept in which I basically just remade my game from scratch in a style that I found to be pretty easy to be consistent with and a time frame that I found to be manageable. I do think that entering this jam after recently finishing a project was a bad idea because I couldn't really exert any more effort than I could. I think the biggest thing that got to me in this event was that I kind of forgot what to do and how to manage my time. So I ended up cramming things together hoping that something worked, which, as you saw, didn't. So my main takeaways from all of this was that I should... This is probably the main takeaway of this project because I had a really awful foundation. I couldn't really build off of it that much, ending up with me being unable to really execute the project's idea properly. Kind of self-explanatory, really. I think that working on a project under stress with a rested mind is more likely to end better than without one. From now on, I don't plan to stick to one genre. If I finish a project, I'll most likely do a drastic 180 and make something that's unexpected. I think that being complacent held me back from actually doing more in this field. And that's that. I also have an upcoming video detailing the project I did for the recently finished GMTK Jam, so stay tuned. With that said, I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you want to support me, just follow me at my itch page for now. Thank you.